Do you want to move it closer? Maybe we should just make an announcement or something that, like, you know, try and keep the chattering and ambient noise down. I mean, I don't even know how you would do that. Okay. Here, can you watch it and tell me how the, like, if the frame and everything looks okay? Huh? Yeah. Wow, there are people here. Hi, Trey.
Hey, how are you? I'm good. Trying to see if we can get this up and it's just not working.
Huh?
But it's just not working online.
It's not coming up.
It's I can get it on business.
Hey Trace, how are you?
Hey, I'm good. How about you?
Good. Brandon says hi.
Oh,
Doing really good. Yeah, he misses you guys. But
how did that job go?
he's working at UT on Wednesdays in the school kinesiology department. And he's working on Mondays at Seton. That's going. I don't like that job that much. It's filing medical records and communication. Because he's in a room by room and has no interaction. So, but they love him over there. So nobody would let him quit. They keep going. We've been at different. And then on Tuesday he works at the radio station in English. So that is part of their yeah. Anyway. Yeah, it's good to see you. I will. I'll call. Say hi to you.
Yeah. Let's do it. you gonna keep an eye on the throughout the thing, or are you just gonna stay in here? Okay. And I can too if we want to like get singing in here or whatever. Okay.
An hour later in the morning, an hour later in the evening.
Do you want to hand with that, or do you have a system?
Yeah, I've been looking at that.
Okay, guys, we're going to get started. If I can have your attention and if everybody can please find a seat, I'd appreciate it. Hello. Thank you so much for coming. We're going to get started now. Thank you all for coming today and finding time in your busy schedules to come to the town hall meeting we're hosting. My name is Gerard Jimenez, and I'm with the Down Syndrome Association of Central Texas and other organizations. And we're very pleased to see you guys here today. I'd like to start off by introducing our guest here today. We've got John Weisenbaum. He's the Commissioner for the Department of Aging and Disability Services. We've got Sharon, I'm going to butcher some names here, guys. I'm sorry, I just apologize up front. Luder. Sharon Luder. She is the, the policy analyst for the Senate Committee on Health and Human Services. I've got Jamie Dudenstein. Hey, got one right. Office of Lieutenant Governor, Senior Advisor for Budget and Policy. I've got, and this one's tough one, Shannon Ganglerty. Shannon Ganglerty. She's the Director of the Senate Committee on Health and Human Services. And we've got Chris Traylor, of course, Chief Deputy Commissioner of Health and Human Service Commission. Forgive me if I'm in your way. Gary Jesse, who's the Deputy Director of the Health and Human Service Commission, overseeing Medicaid program operations. We've got Paula Swinson here. Paula is also with the Health and Human Service Commission. She's the Special Advisor of the Medicaid CHIP Division. And Dennis Burrell, who is with the Coalition for Texas Disabilities, he's going to be the moderator for that. I'm just doing introductions and kind of doing some housekeeping up front. And I'll go ahead and explain to you, well, I'll let Dennis explain the format of the meeting. I'd also like to thank all dozen or so organizations that were willing to host this event. We all felt it was very important to give the community an opportunity to learn more about SB7. There's been a lot of confusion over what SB7 does and doesn't do. The Health and Human Service Commission shortly after the bill was introduced into the Senate Health and Human Services Committee, realized that there was a lot of confusion in the community about this bill, and immediately organized an event, a stakeholder hearing, so people could come and learn about it. It was very well attended. It was during the day, so we felt like it was important to give people an opportunity to learn more about this who can't make it during the course of the day, and so that's why we organized this event. Any housekeeping? If anybody here is requesting reimbursement for travel, Carrie Brock, please raise your hand. She is the person to go to for money. So she's got the reimbursement forms for you. Just please track her down, and she'll be more than happy to work with you on that. Also, please, I hope everybody had the chance to sign in on our registration form in the back. We plan on sending out email updates on SB7 as it moves along. You may or may not know that SB7 has passed through the Senate. There have been floor amendments added to it before it passed. It's now in the House, where there's a high degree of probability there will be more changes. So we will do our best to try to keep you informed on those changes as they occur. Anything else on this? Okay, sounds good, Dennis. All the host organizations involved in organizing this event are in alphabetical order: Adaptive Texas, ARCA Texas, Austin Independent School District Special Education Advisory Committee, Autism Society of Greater Austin, Coalition of Texans with Disabilities, Community Now, Disability Rights Texas, Down Syndrome Association Central Texas, Texas Advocates, Texas Center for Disability Studies at the University of Texas, Texas Council for Developmental Disabilities, Texas Down Syndrome Advocacy Coalition, and Texas Parent to Parent. And with that, I think I've got the introductions, the welcome, the housekeeping out of the way. So without further ado, I plan on turning this over to Dennis Burrell. He'll be our moderator for the evening and explain to you how the format of the meeting and everything else.
Thanks, Gerard. And it may seem like I'm talking loudly. We got a note back on Facebook. This is being live streamed and to an unknown number of people. And what they said is it's a little difficult to hear when Gerard was speaking, so I'll ask all our panelists to speak directly into the microphone. And here is how this evening is going to unfold. It's now 6:15. We are going to end promptly at 8 o'clock. We'll have a brief overview given by a couple of our panelists. Then we have a number of questions here that have been submitted already. The panelists will answer them. There's also the opportunity for anyone in the crowd here to submit a question. There's a written format, and there's Sydney over there waving forms. You can send this on and get it up to me, and they will be answered. And we're hoping to have it, time permitting, at the end of this 2-hour session, a free-for-all where anybody can come up and express a question. Comments, questions, and all that. So let's be respectful. Let's have a good conversation. Our intent today is not to sway anybody to take certain positions. This is an informative session. And I want to echo Gerard in thanking all these good folks for being here with us. And so we will begin by asking Shannon, what was the inspiration behind Senate Bill 7?
Sure. And my name is Shannon Gay-Gray again, and I'm the Senate Health and Human Services Committee Director. Senator Nelson is the chair of the committee, and she's the author of SB7, so that's why we're here. And first, I just wanted to thank you all for coming. Can you not hear me? Okay, sorry. Can you hear me in the back? Just wanted to thank you all for coming. We really appreciated all the feedback we've been getting over the last several months, really, at this point. We think it's helped, the feedback has helped us make a better bill, and we know we're going to continue to get feedback from you all and hopefully make it an even better bill as it goes to the House. So we appreciate it. I think there's some people that have come from out of town, and we appreciate that. The beginnings of this bill actually started during the interim when we, the Senate Committee on Health and Human Services, had an interim charge to look at the long-term care system. And what we were looking at was how do we increase services, long-term care services, to individuals that currently are not receiving any services? And how do we take services that people are receiving and make them better, make the quality better, make the coordination better? And what resulted out of that study was SB 7. We still have those same goals. We still, that is what we believe SB 7 does. We have no intention of cutting services. That is not the goal of this bill. It is not a bill intended to contain costs. It is a bill to improve services and to improve access to services. There has been countless meetings, and I see some very familiar faces in this audience. So I know many of you have met with Jamie Dudensing, with Lieutenant Governor's office, with Commissioner Traylor, with Sharon Luter in our office, and we've listened to you, and we have put changes into the bill. There was a committee substitute, there was a floor amendment as well, and as was said earlier, the bill is now in the House, and Representative Richard Raymond is our House sponsor, and he is committed to the same goals that we're committed to, and he's committed to continuing to listen to your feedback and to make whatever improvements we need to make as we move forward. So we would just look forward tonight to a productive conversation. I didn't know about the free-for-all part, so we'll wait to see how that goes. But we're looking forward to a productive conversation and hearing your feedback. And with that, I was going to turn it over to Jamie, who's going to talk a little bit more about the specifics of the bill. And then Commissioner Traylor wants to chime in, or welcome to have you take part. Thanks.
As Shannon said, my name is Jamie Dudensing, and I work for the Lieutenant Governor's office, and I've been working with Shannon and Sharon and Commissioner Traylor, I guess since early fall, on the bill. The bill itself, I'm going to do a quick overview, high level. I'm not trying to get down too far into too many weeds, but we are ready to answer any questions down to the smallest detail that anyone needs. Commissioner Janik's here. I didn't see him walk in. The Health and Human Services Commissioner is in the back hiding. So the bill itself, I'm going to say it really breaks down into three different areas. One is long-term care service delivery reforms with a real emphasis on intellectual developmental disability reforms. The second part is really dealing with healthcare reforms as far as integration, quality of care improvements, really trying to integrate benefits and get people into programs where they're in a medical home and their care is coordinated. The third piece is really building in some really strong outcome measures, quality of care measures to hold providers accountable and managed care companies accountable to ensure that individuals are receiving high quality care. On the first part, really on the long-term care service delivery reform, a big part of this, and as Shannon was mentioning, is that we've been working on these issues for a number of years with the interest list and trying to help individuals get services that have been waiting for services for 6 years, 8 years, now I think it's 11 years, 12 years, as long as that on some of these interest lists. And many of the sessions, I know last session wasn't a session where there was interest list reductions, but many sessions, the 2005 session, the 2007 session, the 2009 session, there were significant investments in the interest list, yet it really never made a dent. It just kept growing, and you had people waiting longer and longer. And that was on the IDD side. What we saw in those same years on the long-term care side for individuals who are elderly and physically disabled is that we had programs like the primary health home care program and the CBA program built into the STAR Plus program, while we were also doing interest list reductions. And individuals who were eligible at the SSI level, Social Security Disability level, individuals who were eligible automatically got services. They didn't have to wait at the same time that interest list reductions were happening. But this wasn't happening on the IDD side. So what this bill starts to attempt is to build sort of almost equality in the system, to build those same type of reforms that we had on that side of of the long-term care system for the IDD population. And we start this off by adding attendant services and debilitative services as the two main services into the STAR Plus program. And by adding those services in the STAR Plus program, anyone who's eligible for STAR Plus, so anyone who's eligible at SSI and eligible for Medicaid and STAR Plus will now receive those services. They will not have to wait for those services anymore. So we're expecting at least about 12,000 individuals to be eligible, many I assume who are waiting for services on the waiting list. And if they aren't waiting, I'm sure they would be if they knew about the interest list. So this gets individual services right away in the next 2 years. But what we saw with this, well, could we set up a pathway to see if we could add more services into STAR Plus over, and the bill sets out a 7-year time period. As we'd add these services into STAR Plus, now individuals would no longer have to wait for those services either. So we set up this pathway through the bill, and the first milestone after adding these benefits in 2017, where we look at the first waiver, the Texas Home Living waiver, and at that time, the commission and DAS will make a decision, can we add this waiver to STAR Plus? And by doing this, then individuals would no longer have to wait for any of the services that are eligible for Medicaid STAR Plus, would no longer have to wait for any of those services that are in the Texas Home Living waiver benefit package. That would include services like respite, employment services, day habilitation services. Then we set up the next step, when you get to 2020, can you do the same thing with the CLASS program, with the HDS program, including the residential components of the HDS program? And so the big ones. Can you get the supported home living, the foster care, or the residential pieces in so that people are no longer having to wait? And what we're hoping is this sets up, instead of us only having a system where we're doing waiting list reduction and not ever really getting anywhere with the waiting list, now we'll be attacking the problem from two sides. We'll still be doing waiting list reduction. The legislature will still make those decisions every session. But at the same time, now we'll have a program that we're building up over here that's not going to get everybody everything on day one, but it's going to start giving a much larger group of people something. And it's going to slowly build up, hopefully over time, to have almost an everybody program where we can get everyone in. And hopefully we'll have the same thing happen we've seen with the CDA program, which is that waiver that we deal with for the elderly and the physically disabled, and that waiting list, I think when I really became more aware of this in 2003, that waiting list was about 65,000. It's under 20,000 now. At that same time, all of the CLASS, HCS waivers were about 45,000. They're over 100,000 now. So what we've seen is that one was successful coming down. We're hoping to have that same type of impact over this 7-year time period of reforms with our populations that are intellectually and developmentally disabled. At the same time we're doing this pathway, there's also going to be some pilots set up to try to pilot whether you can capitate all of those long-term care services that are in the CLASS and HCS waiver. And you would really see that go through a provider that individuals are familiar with already in the community that's already providing those services. And that would give the commission the information they need so that as you get approached 2020, how to move those services and how to capitate them. Can the state afford to do this? Is this something that we can really build up over time? And it would give us the information on the best ways to do that transition and make sure that all of our consumers are protected and we have a transition process that we can evaluate as we move through the process. Now, the second part of the bill is really getting into some integrated healthcare reform pieces. We're talking about creating a very specialized benefit package for our children that are disabled called the STAR Kids package. We already have a package like this for our foster care children that provided much more intense case management, a much better medical home for them, made sure they got services quickly as soon as they came into the system, provided a much broader range of mental health benefits for those children. We're hoping to have the same kind of specialized, integrated package for these children who are disabled that will help them get a very specialized medical home so that their care can be better integrated and higher quality of care. And, moving it up here. And so that way, those children will hopefully get higher quality of care. They'll get the right care, the right time, the right place. And one benefit of this is if they are getting the care that they need, they may get sick less. You know, or they may receive their services in a physician's office versus having to go to the emergency room for services. Or their parents may be taught the best way to deal with certain situations so you can prevent having to go to the emergency room the next time. So one of our goals here is, yes, you know, you may end up saving some money with these types of reforms, but it's not because we're cutting costs, it's because we're gonna do a much better job taking care of these children. Another part of these integrated reforms are moving nursing home benefits into our STAR Plus program. And that ensures that, so if someone is in a nursing home, that when they move from a nursing home into a hospital, or they're from a hospital and they're needing to be discharged back into either the community or into a nursing home, you're talking about a much better integrated system, so that you have fewer hospital readmissions that could have been prevented, or hospital admissions that could have been prevented by someone getting better care at that time, because you have someone monitoring that overall care for that person. The third piece are the quality of care reforms, and you know, I think there's some very strong provisions in here on going after hospitals for complications that could have been prevented, readmissions that could have been prevented. There's also some very strong outcome measures that are the HMOs, or the managed care companies, are going to be held accountable for. So in the bill, the managed care companies, out of their premium that they're paid, they're going to be at risk for 5% of their premium. That if they don't have good quality of care measures for their clients, they're going to lose money and be at risk for this. And their quality of care measures is the same thing we've been mentioning. You know, if people are going to the emergency room, it could have been prevented by helping them get to a physician's office. We're going to hold that managed care company accountable now for that. If it meant that they needed better discharge planning after they left the hospital, and that meant getting into a physician's office sooner after they left the hospital, we're going to hold the managed care company accountable for that now. And so there are a number of provisions on these quality of care outcome measures to try to improve our system and make sure individuals are getting the care they need. Which, and to echo what Gina was saying, and what Senator Nelson's goal has been over all the reforms that we've had with many of these bills over the last few years, is if we can get people the care they need at the right time and the right place, we're going to have a more efficient system, and we're going to have healthier individuals in our system. And those are really the three high-level pieces of this. I know there are a lot more specific details on this. Oh, I do have one piece. On the amendments that went through, and I think this is a very important part of the amendment that gives people comfort. One, the bill never spoke to cutting any type of services. But I know there are a number of individuals that are concerned that if a waiver moved in to STAR Plus, would that mean their services would change, would it be reduced? And so there were fears in the community about what that would mean. So as we set up this 7-year time period, as you got to the HCS and class waiver, what the bill now says is, if you are someone, and DPMD, if you are someone in one of these waiver programs, when this decision is made to move the waiver program into STAR Plus, you can make the decision to stay in your waiver program, receive your long-term care services outside of STAR Plus, or you can make the decision to move in. New individuals would be enrolled in STAR Plus at that time, but everyone else would almost have a grandfather provision, and they could decide to move in. Now, our goal is that we would be building a really great program where you would have the supported home living and the residential services from HCS. You would have the specialized therapies from class, and you would have the types of services in the DPMD that would fit multiple individuals. And so you would actually have a program that when you got in, you got the services that you needed. Not necessarily, I know right now sometimes people are having to pick which waiver they're going to get on, and they don't, they want these services in class and they want the services over here at HCS, but they're having to make a really tough choice on what they're going into. Our goal in this is to create a good program that everyone would want to come into. But just to give everyone added protection, they would not have to come in. They would be able to make that choice. Commissioner Traylor, would you like to add anything?
No, Jimmy, I think you hit the highlights of this very well. One of the things we'd like to get from everyone tonight is Now that we've laid out the goals of the bill, what's in the bill, and some of the changes that were made as a result of talking with many of you that are here tonight, are there things that we missed? Are there things that need to be changed in the bill to make this an optimal system for everybody that it accesses long-term services and supports in the state? That's really why we're here. And to make this productive, it would be great to hear from everybody that has a concern about the bill or has changes that you'd like to see made. So with that, yes, and Shannon wants to say something.
I just want to add one comment. I mentioned when I talked earlier that Representative Raymond was our House sponsor, and we didn't realize when we set this meeting up that the House would be debating the appropriations bill right now. And so that is why Representative Raymond and his staff were not able to join us tonight, but we're working with their staff on whatever changes we made in the House. So just wanted to clarify.
And thanks. So I guess.
All right.
Hand it over to you.
Yeah, let's go. We got some questions. And if I seem to be shouting at you, I'm going to encourage the rest of you to speak directly into the microphone so our people online can hear. That is a bit of an issue, so I will remind you all. So we have 3 microphones. I will leave it up to each of you to decide who will address the questions. I think I can pass mine to Paula and Gary, and the rest of you can figure it out. Now, some of these questions may be repetitive from some of Jamie's comments, but please, let's go ahead and at least, briefly recap and focus in on the question in a direct answer. And we have 18 right now, and I have another 4 that have been submitted already this evening. First question, does this bill apply to all Medicaid recipients? Yes. Okay, question number 2. And this is the most common question I've heard and you've heard, so let's put this one definitively answered. Whose services would be cut or eliminated under SB 7?
Nobody's.
Anybody else in the panel want to reiterate that? Nobody's. Okay, nobody's. Question number 3 is reference to the new Community Habilitation and Attendant Care Program, and it's a 3-part question. How many would be served in the new Community Habilitation and Attendant Care Program? Who would qualify? And what would be the impact on a person's place on the waiver interest list?
That's a very good question. And the benefit we project, and keep in mind it is a projection, that about 11,900, or just call it roughly 12,000 persons, and would be able to access an attendant or new persons that are not currently receiving those services would be able to access an attendant or habilitation service. And that the persons that would be able to access those services would be persons that have an intellectual developmental disability diagnosis. Right now, in the long-term services and support system in the state, persons with physical disabilities have been able to access a similar benefit through primary home care or community attendant services throughout the state for many years. And the population that was left out of that was persons with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And that goes back to the decision that was made in 1981 or 3, I can't remember which, but 30 years ago plus. And now what we're trying to do is to provide equity in the system so persons with intellectual disabilities may be able to access that basic level of benefit while they're on an interest list. That would not impact anyone's ability to access those services, those waiver services that are currently provided. Also, you must understand that financial eligibility for the services is SSI. And so the persons that are eligible for the service would be persons with an intellectual disability and also an SSI income or more. And so those are the individuals that will be able to access the service. If you're on an interest list for HCS or class, your eligibility and place on that interest list would not be impacted by your receipt of the service. The service that you would receive would be a service that you would view because of your SSI eligibility and your intellectual disability. It's just a service that you would get. It would be a state plan service that you'd be entitled to.
Okay, now this is a bit of a longer question. Many families are currently receiving services within the different Medicaid waiver programs. Over time, as individuals' names have come to the top of the lists of the different waivers, families have to choose which program fits the needs of their loved ones. Would this no longer be the situation, but rather they would have a portfolio of all the services to select from based on the individual's needs? And somebody else other than Commissioner Traylor will answer that question.
And as I said during our summary, that is our goal by 2020, when we look at really adding in the big waivers. We've already hopefully been able to add in Texas Home Living, which is a much more basic level benefit package, but talking about the big waivers, class and HCS and DBMD, the idea is that you would really be bringing in these different benefit packages, and instead of someone having to choose this route or this route, you would really, be evaluating what you really need. People would work with you and your family to figure out what it is the best package for you, and you would get the services that you need at that time, and when you needed different services as your life changed, those services would then also be available later on. And so you'd have a much more flexible system that really you would really be able to get what you needed at that time, versus having these silos where you're stuck in this silo because you made this choice after waiting 10 years to get some kind of service.
Yeah, and I want to point out that's a decision on how we integrate those services into the larger waiver. That decision gets made in 2020. So there are still decisions left to be made. If we keep the current system as it is, we for sure will integrate those services and give you that choice. But if we have the opportunity, they can't hear me? Okay, I'm sorry.
If the speaker says all that, just move it in the mic.
Okay.
Everybody here can hear fine. Everybody online having
Paula asked me to act like I'm talking to her. I'm not happy with it. So I want to kind of, in 2020 is the year that we make that decision on how the program progresses, whether or not we're able to integrate like class and HCS services into one package, where you don't have to choose between class and HCS. And that will be a decision that we make in 2020 if it's cost effective to do so.
Thank you. So this next question, I think, drives at a lot of people's perceptions of managed care and how this may not seem to be a 2+2 equation. I think and it's a good question. Our understanding of capitation is that providers of long-term care services and supports will be paid the same amount of money for each person they serve. If that is correct, will there be an incentive for the service providers to provide all the services that people with very severe disabilities need? And Paula wants to make.
I'll take this one. The capitation that's described in the bill is a means that we would use to pay the provider, the big service organization that would be overseeing the care. It's the same way we pay the HMOs today. We capitate and pay them so much money per person per month, and that's capitated. We're not talking about requiring, and generally are not very fond of, the individual provider being capitated. It generally works in managed care that providers continue to be paid as they are today on a fee-for-service basis, and you receive your money from that greater entity, the MCO or whoever's running the pilot program. So we're not talking about forcing capitation to the individual provider level.
And I'll just add to Paula. So in terms of a plan development, as it is in the current waiver, we have an obligation to ensure we have a comprehensive plan of care to meet the members' needs. That would be the same situation in managed care. That responsibility still exists. So the expectation is that the development of that comprehensive plan would address what those needs are. And those needs may be unique and they do, they vary by member. So it would be the same expectation. There would not be an incentive to just provide a bare minimum across the board. And keep in mind, at work in all of this, is that provider choice exists. So an individual who's unhappy, perhaps, with a managed care organization could make the selection to move, perhaps, to a new one. So there is really an incentive built in for that MCO to provide the best care as possible. And so I think part of this is built around, a perception of what managed care is. But the MCOs in this state provide tremendous value to many individuals today. And many of those individuals, if they were here, would say, our experience was not that we lost our services when we moved into managed care. It's really built around an integration of acute and long-term services and supports, and focused on better outcomes for the members.
And this next question is, it may sound the same, but it has a key difference. Instead of incentives, the question is, what safeguards will there be to prevent providers from refusing necessary services to people with severe disabilities that need these additional services? So the question is now flipped from incentives to safeguards.
I'm your biggest safeguard. We've got a whole host of people in HHSC that it's our job to monitor and make sure that the HMOs are meeting the needs of the clients. We take that charge very seriously. Some of the plans are here. They would be nodding in very strong agreement that this is part of what we do. This program is meant to be for the client's choice, the needs being met with delivery of good quality care. And when they don't do that, we have ways of sanctioning and some other interesting things that we can do to make it a little more difficult for the plans. We want them to do the right thing, and they will. People will make mistakes, but we will correct those. And so we are there to ensure that there are incentives. There's lots of different strategies that we can utilize to make sure that they are doing it and to penalize when they're not and make the corrections so that they will come back into compliance. We've got a lot of history doing this, and we have found it to be very successful.
I also want to add a little bit to that, too. Some of the questions that came up a little early when we began discussing this early on in the legislative session was, does ICF go away? Does HCS go away? All those providers that provide ICF services or HCS services, they still are going to have to be licensed under ICF, and also the HCS providers are still going to have to be certified. The same protections that exist today under the licensure and certification will exist in the future. So if you have a concern about services that you receive now or services that you may receive in a waiver in the future, those same protections do not go away under the bill. They still will be there. They'll still be licensed ICFs. They'll still be certified HCS providers. They'll still have to be. And there'll still be, the class providers that are licensed under the HCSA statute, or what we call basically the home health agencies that are licensed to provide class, will still have to be licensed. They'll still have to protect and foster health and safety of the client, of the individual that is being served in those waiver programs. So not only will you have the protections that you have today, you'll also have Paula and her team ensuring that not only are your waiver services being provided the way they're supposed to be, they'll also be making sure that your acute care services are provided the way they should be too. So I kind of look at this in two ways. You have what you've got today for protections, and you're going to have us with a contract also that will also provide additional protection for you or your loved one that's receiving services in these programs.
Dennis, I'm going to add one more thing. One other thing I think helpful to add that was also added in the amendment on the floor is that service coordination will be with the local authorities. So you will have someone still there that can help assist you with finding the provider that you've been looking for, the same way that they help assist individuals find providers now. That will also be able to help assist you in making sure you're picking the right managed care company. And I also think it's also important to point out that Medicaid managed care is different than the private market managed care. The contract provisions that are required by HHSC are actually stronger. There's stronger network requirements, there's stronger contractual requirements, and they can add and change their contracts anytime they want to. So if for some reason we find that there is ever a problem, that where people aren't, that there are trends in the system, that we think something's going on, we can always make our contract stronger with the managed care companies and hold them even more accountable at any point in time that we choose.
Can I add something? We're all building all these answers. I wanted to add something about the provider piece and the protection within the bill. And we had a lot of questions from families that have said, we really like our service provider, and we're worried you're going to force us to change providers. And so one of the protections within expansion of managed care and included in SB 7 is implementation of what we would refer to as a significant traditional provider. And what that means is when expansion of managed care occurs, or as we relate to a rollout of community first choice, those providers who've been delivering these benefits today would be the providers that would be enrolled within that system. They're guaranteed a contract as long as they meet credentialing requirements with the managed care organizations. They would be the providers included. And so that's one thing that should provide some peace to individuals who may be receiving services today and concerned that they would lose their provider today. And so all of those providers would have an opportunity, and the MCOs would be obligated to contract with those entities to deliver a benefit. CFC, because it's new, and the individuals who access CFC and the IDDPs are on interest lists today, the protection there as it relates to STP is that the providers that would be included would be those who already have an experience delivering supported home living, delivering services under the class program habilitation. And so that's an added protection to ensure that the providers with whom these individuals may be choosing to receive services from would have that experience.
Great, thank you all. So there's the next series of questions relate to the deaf, blind, multiple disability waiver, the deaf, blind, multiple disability waiver. And panel, some of these, again, may seem similar to some of your statements or prior questions, but remember that these are defined and more narrowly, so if it even sounds like you're going to be addressing it again, please address it again. Okay, so the first question, if pilots are being set up with a capitation goal, what does that mean for our more expensive deaf, blind children? And of course what they mean is higher levels of services.
So a little bit about the pilots. One, they will be voluntary. So an individual who right off the bat has a concern that they may not get the services that they want or need would have the opportunity to be able to elect to not be part of the pilot. As we've already discussed within the capitation, the MCO is obligated to provide whatever care is necessary. These pilots don't really contemplate a traditional MCO delivering those services. So, it's a little bit different. But in terms of what a capitated payment would look like, whoever is delivering those benefits would receive a payment to coordinate whatever services were necessary. And within that payment, depending on what informal supports exist and what the unique needs of those individuals are, some individuals, just like the waivers today, some individuals receive a limited amount of benefit and some people receive an extensive amount of benefit. And we all know that those needs change over time, and so individuals who start out limited may end up receiving a significant amount. But that would be the responsibility within that pilot. The organization delivering those benefits would be obligated to make sure those needs are met. But the first point around the pilot is that they would be voluntary. And then as it relates to SB 7 and the grandfathering provision that Jamie mentioned, individuals are trying to make a decision. If they're in a waiver and they're happy with the waiver, they wouldn't be obligated to go into the managed care system. But the goal is to have a managed care system that's robust and can respond to all of these needs. And so an individual would have the opportunity to say, I no longer have to decide if I really want a robust system of specialized therapies in class, or if I really want residential that's been part of HCS. And right now families are saying, well, I'll take class now, but at some point I really want residential, so I'll hold on for that. And so it would provide an opportunity to really level those benefits and allow families to just focus on what their needs are, as opposed to having to be put in a certain waiver. As it relates to DBMD specifically, I think that was the question. We know DBMD is a very specialized benefit. We know that there's a very limited number of people who receive DBMD, I think around 157 individuals in the state. And so we know the services are very important to that group. Their needs are unique. Intervenor services are something we always talk about. And so any design that included that array, as we've discussed, would have to have those in it. And so families would have an opportunity to elect to be in a pilot that included DBMD or not. They would have the opportunity to select the grandfathering provision and never actually go into managed care or not. And so I think the families who are benefiting from DBMD services should feel confident that they will have a choice as it relates to those services, and we'll be able to make a decision that will best meet the needs of the individual that they're providing or coordinating care for.
Thanks, Gary. And I'm going to tie this next question into your comments. You mentioned the intervenor services, and there's also things like orientation and mobility services currently in the deaf, blind, multiple disabilities waivers. What if these folks select to go into the pilot, or ultimately, if it takes place, the managed care program? Will these, key, unique services? And I think this is really an important question because these are people that need a lot of services, and by protecting their services, in a sense, it's somewhat of a protection of a full array. So, should this family choose to be in the pilot or ultimately the waiver, would those services still be in place?
Absolutely.
Don't you like those short questions? Okay, this is, again, another deaf, blind, multiple disabilities question. Currently, a case manager who has training in the specific needs of the deaf, blind population does the assessment of need in a deaf, blind, multiple disabilities waiver. How will you ensure that someone who is qualified to work with deaf, blind individuals and understand their needs will perform assessments?
This isn't such a short answer, but within the contract, we would define the requirements for service coordinators. And if you look at the current requirements within service coordination, they are extensive. And the NCOs that are here will tell you that we require the type of individuals that must be performing these types of duties. We're specific about the level of support that they're obligated as minimums to deliver. If you think about SB 7, and the decision around service coordination, around the community first choice option. Many of you in this room have said there's a comfort that exists with individuals that are coordinating services for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And the NCOs today are delivering services to those types of individuals as well within the STAR Plus system. But that specific coordination, navigation benefit that local authorities across the state deliver every day is a comfort that lots of families want. And it is that expertise that they really have grown to support, need support from, and want to have continue with them in this new system. So SB 7 does include, as we've already discussed, the local authorities across the state delivering that service coordination. And what will have to happen as it relates to that role is the coordination between the local authority and ultimately the MCO that will be managing that provider network and actually paying for those benefits that get delivered on behalf of those members. So that's the type of protections that would be considered. As you enter this type of system, you want to make sure, one, that the array of services is consistent with what individuals need and what they want. And we've already said you don't lose something going into the system. The other part is making sure that the professionals with whom these families will interface have the expertise to be able to meet those needs. And so if an individual with deaf, blind, multiple disability enters a program where nobody within that system understands the unique needs of people with deaf, blind, multiple disabilities, the system would fail. So those would be minimum expectations. Right up front would be part of the readiness reviews that we would conduct at HHSC to ensure that those entities are ready and able to be able to respond to those needs and would be part of, and I say this, if you know Paula, the MCOs that are here, all we have to do is send Paula out and it'll get taken care of. But it is a gift, and I mean, we're kidding, but seriously, she has a passion for this, and it's been very successful. And we don't want to sound like we have to force the MCOs to do this, because this is something that they do willingly and do a very good job. But as we add new populations to this system, there is an expectation that they have to be able to respond, and they have to be able to meet these members' needs.
Yes, those of us who've had the experience know never mess with Paula. So, panelists, I would encourage you to, we use acronyms a lot, so when we speak among each other, we all seem to know what they are, but let's not assume that everybody knows. So I'm going to encourage you to speak out to those acronyms, and not to pick on you, Gary. Yeah, pretty good. Okay, this is, I know that Commissioner Weisenbaum's been lonely down there, so there's a class question. Okay, the Class Medicaid Waiver Program currently provides specialized therapies that are not offered in any other Medicaid waiver program. When Class is rolled into managed care organizations, will the family members continue to have these as an option to receive these therapies, or will the specialized therapies be discontinued? And I'm going to take my own advice here. When we refer to things like specialized therapies, those things range from things like music therapy, massage therapy, hippotherapy, which is with horses, incredibly effective, by the way, aquatic therapy, recreational therapy. That is what is referred to as specialized therapy. So I want to take this one, Commissioner Weisenbaum.
I stole his microphone. I was going to bring this up on the last question. I think it's important to point out one of the reasons why we've chosen such a long timeline is that, to a certain extent, we can't say we know the answer to all of these questions. There's a reason why we have a 7-year planning process for 2020, and we have a stakeholder process built into the bill to make sure that these services get built in the best way possible. That on the deaf-blind multiple disability program, if the assessment needs to be done a certain way, that's done a certain way. That if there's a certain way to coordinate and bring these services in from the different waivers, we do it the right way, and we have a planning process to get there. And as the additional protection, we have the grandfather clause, which says, if you really don't think we did a very good job, you don't have to come into it. So there is a reason why we chose the 2020 time period. But what we can say is, with everything that's built into the bill, that the intention on this is for them to try to get the full waivers into STAR Plus, to bring these in. And so under that statement, one of the very important pieces of the class program, and that I assume over a 7-year time period that you would hear from stakeholders, that you would hear during this process, is that the specialized therapies are a very important process, a very important piece of that program. It would be a very important part of that program for all of the consumers that would be in the STAR Plus program, that may actually be in the HCS program but might need that. The same way that you have the residential services in HCS that some of the individuals in the class program would want. We can't say right now, the bill doesn't say, yes, all of this is going to happen in 2020. What it says is it directs the commission and DAS to attempt to put them all in by 2020, and it has a stakeholder process to make sure how it's done and how it's planned involves all of the consumers, involves all of you, involves everyone that's watching, so that there's a very thought-out process to get there. And our hope is we're adding, and that's we're hoping to get the experience we need from adding the habilitative and the attendant services now to find out what is the best way to keep adding these services to make sure consumers are protected, to make sure we have a transition process, and that we're adding the benefits that they need into the system.
Let me kind of get to, if you're asking whether the therapy services completely go away, the answer to that is no. But if we can fold them into the STAR Plus waiver where everybody gets the therapy services, that's the goal. Okay. But the therapy services as they exist now do not go away. But our hope is that nobody has to wait for them anymore, if that makes sense. And so the therapy service, you may have to be on an interest list or a waiting list like people are now for those therapy services, but they don't go away. Okay.
I'd like to add one other comment to that, because I think there's a feature of this bill and of the community first choice part of it that happens in the next 2 years that not everyone appreciates. But in the class waiver, the service that is the most used service by far is habilitation. That's the service that the vast majority of the dollars in class are spent for habilitation. And this bill makes habilitation an entitlement for individuals at the SSI level and below. So for many adults, for sure, who have disabilities, who they're not earning above the SSI limit, many of those adults are going to be SSI eligible, and this is going to make the most used service in class an entitlement service as part of STAR Plus. That's a very significant and dramatic change in services for people with IDD, in particular people who have related, what the waiver calls related conditions, autism, cerebral palsy, other conditions that are developmental disabilities. So I just wanted to add that.
Excellent. I would again remind you folks here is that you can submit a written question. We're getting a nice stack here too. So if you raise your hand, Sydney or Gerard will bring you a form, so we have that capacity to do so. Next question. Some families participate in the medically dependent children's program due to significant medical needs. Will the same services be available in a managed care approach? Is this addressed in Senate Bill 7? Gary Lidley.
Yeah, it really is the same answer, but we're going to answer it because you want us to answer it again.
That's right.
And that is, we've not talked a lot about the medically dependent children's program, but what is considered as part of the STAR Kids program would be inclusion of MDCP, medically dependent children's program, and those benefits. So a family that is currently realizing those benefits, if they're included within the STAR Kids program, would realize the same benefits that they have today. And so they would not go away.
Okay, yes, it is the same answer, but again, I think there's a fine distinction. This was the first time the medically dependent children's program, and there are interest groups that want to know specifically, and they want to hear that same answer. They want to hear it from the horse's mouths, if you will. Okay. Now, again, this is a question you may have heard, but who will decide what is necessary versus unnecessary in the needs of an individual?
Well, as occurs today within the waiver system, there is an entity that's designated to complete a comprehensive assessment. So within any of the systems we're in today, whether you're class and you have a case management agency that's making a recommendation or determining whether or not you have a developmental disability, or you're an HCS, Home and Community Support Services waiver, and a local authority is assisting you with the process, or you're in STAR Plus, and the managed care organization is completing your medical necessity level of care determination, or a 2060 to determine what your needs are. This system is all built around the managed care system, and the waiver system today is built around an assessment process. And so somebody who's qualified to determine what an individual's needs are would conduct that assessment and would then ultimately recommend what needs would be necessary, or what the needs are, and what services would be necessary to be able to meet those needs. And so when we talk about the system, the managed care system, it really is built on the same type of system that has always existed. So an assessment to document need, that assessment would be conducted on a regular basis, at least annually, or as needs change, to ensure that the plan in place continues to meet those individuals' needs. And so that system would still operate much the same way it does today.
Okay, a little bit different part of the bill now. How would the functional assessment described in SB 7 be different than current assessments? Who would like to take that?
Well, the language in SB 7 doesn't spell out which assessment tool the state is to go to. What it says is to evaluate first the current assessment instruments that are used for IDD programs. That's primarily what's called the ICAP. I'm sorry, I don't remember what that stands for. But it's the primary assessment tool. There have been a lot of concerns expressed by stakeholders over the years about the adequacy of that assessment tool, that particular instrument, that it's not specific enough, it doesn't capture strengths enough, it doesn't capture behavioral needs adequately. There are other alternative instruments that other states use. There are more than one. There's one called the Supports Intensity Scale. There are some other ones that other states use. And what the bill asks us to do is study the current ones we have and look at ones that are available in other states, and even we may have the option of creating our own, working with stakeholders, and to basically do a study and develop a new assessment tool, or perhaps an existing one, but I think there's a presumption that it will be a changed assessment tool that best and better evaluates the needs that people have. The idea is to get a tool that better captures exactly what somebody needs so that the resources that are allocated to them match what they need. Not more, not less, but right on the mark. That's the goal of it. So we don't have a specific answer as to what the new assessment tool will measure or how it will be different, but it tells us to give that a close look and to work with stakeholders. There's a lot of language in here. If you do get a chance to read the language of the bill, look at the stakeholder input and advisory council language. It's very robust. There are a lot of different stakeholder interests that are required to be part of this, including families and persons with disabilities.
Yeah, and I want to point out that there's a couple of assessment tools. There's really one change in assessment that's required by our BIP, which is our balancing incentive program. And John, you want to kind of talk a little bit about the assessment that's also in the BIP, because I think there's a level of confusion about how many assessments and things that are out there that have to be done. But there is a comprehensive assessment that's required by the BIP. And the reason that we looked at changing the assessment from the ICAP to something different is because we've heard so much from stakeholders, many of you in the room, that we needed to change that particular assessment instrument. But one I don't think we've talked enough about is the requirements of the BIP and the assessment tool there.
Sure. Well, it takes a little bit of explaining to say what this balancing incentive program thing is about. This is a program that is part of a federal law that we are in Texas are participating in, and it basically provides some additional funding to the state in return for the state establishing what's called a, quote, no wrong door system of access to services at the local level across disabilities. So this is not specific to intellectual and developmental disabilities, but it includes them. We have multiple front doors to our services that DADS covers as aging and disability services. We have area agencies on aging that people go to if they want to seek services that relate to services for the people who are aging. There are the local IDD authorities that people go to access IDD services. There are the DADS offices and the HHSC services and managed care services that people go to access. Right now, those systems don't do a very good job of talking to each other, and families in real life their needs aren't necessarily segregated into one or the other of those front doors. The goal here is that in a no wrong door system, you can go and, quote, tell your story once, so that you give an intake, someone's taking that information down, and it's going into multiple systems and multiple agencies electronically, and you have electronic sharing so that they can give you a sense of all the things that you might be eligible for across those systems. You might have a person with disabilities and taking care of an elderly relative in your home at the same time and need those services. So part of what we're required to do in setting up that no wrong door system is ensure that the assessment tools that we use are coordinated and cover all the ranges of issues that people might need. It doesn't require us to have one single assessment that would be used for any kind of service, because that's a challenge to do. It doesn't preclude us from doing that, but it gives us the flexibility to ensure that if we have multiple ones, that they all together cover the domains that need to be covered in an assessment. So that's different than what we were talking about just a minute earlier about, which is specific in Senate Bill 7 to the IDD assessment and replacing essentially the ICAP assessment tool. I hope that helps. It's kind of confusing to understand why it would be.
Yeah, Commissioner, is it fair to say that a functional assessment is not driven by a diagnosis and more directly correlated to the needs of the activities of daily living?
Sure, that's what that term means. That's right.
Okay, just want to make sure that that was understood. Thank you. We've talked a lot about Texas home living out and.
Can I add
yes,
something?
yes, please.
Sorry. We were just trying to do the math as Commissioner Weisenbaum was talking, but the Senate, on the Senate side, we put in approximately $140 million in all funds for several of the projects that Commissioner Weisenbaum was talking about. So just wanted to reiterate that not only is SB 7 trying to move forward with several of these initiatives, but in the appropriations process, we're putting money into the bill to demonstrate that there's a commitment to do this.
$140 million sounds like a demonstration to me. But we've talked a lot about the Texas home living, and I know there's a lot of other issues, but I would ask if somebody could briefly summarize the effect of Texas on Texas home living of Senate Bill 7.
So right now in the bill, the way it directs is that in the year 2017, the agency would make a decision on if they could move the entire Texas home living program into STAR Plus. And what that means at that time is that everyone that is at that SSI income level would no longer have to wait for the benefit package that's in the Texas home living program. Does that help?
Okay, again, this question, a fine distinction here, but this has been talked about a little bit. What would be the role of local intellectual and developmental disability authorities, and how would the authorities, and this is the different part, interact with the managed care organizations?
So we've talked a little bit about this already. So as contemplated in SB 7, the service coordination for individuals that are receiving benefits, IDD benefits through Community First Choice, would receive their service coordination through a local intellectual disability authority. The coordination between the local authority and the managed care organizations would have to be strong. We would have to lay out the expectations, obviously, within the managed care organization's contract. They themselves would need some type of service agreement between them and the 39 potential local authorities across the state that would be delivering this service coordination benefit. What we would anticipate, what we would expect, is that if these individuals are receiving their service coordination, albeit their assessment and a recommendation of a benefit to be delivered through a managed care organization, that closeness, that coordination would be ongoing. So as an individual's needs change, there'd be a connection back to that local service coordinator. As the reassessment is needed, as the annual assessment, as that individual service plan is constructed, that there would be a close coordination between that service coordinator who would really be representing the needs and expectations of that individual who'd be receiving that benefit, and the managed care organization who ultimately would be coordinating their acute care and actually authorizing and paying for these benefits as recommended by the service coordinator. So it would be a very close coordination. These partnerships that exist today in many parts of our system would have to be strong, would have to be well coordinated. We would lay out expectations, obviously in contract and through oversight to ensure that the needs of those individuals are clearly represented by their service coordinator and that the plans of care ultimately implemented reflect those needs.
Can I actually go back to the previous conversation? I started talking about money and I didn't give a full picture, so I want to make sure and clarify. I talked about the $140 million that was put into the budget for bid purposes, but in addition to the $140 million, there was $371 million put in specifically for the attendant and habilitative services piece of SB 7. So that is just for that piece of the bill. There was an additional $70 million put in for promoting independence and $162 million put in to reduce, to further reduce interest lists in addition to the promoting independence slots. There was also $153 million put into what's called Article 11, and that just means when we, or if we can find additional resources, that's at the top of our list on what to fund next. So I didn't want to mislead anyone by saying we just put $140 million in, but we made some significant investments.
And I just wanted to make sure, because we're trying to be as clear as possible, we're talking a lot about habilitation. Those of you who are waiting for home and community support services waiver, habilitation, what we're talking about is supported home living. So those terms are used synonymously as a habilitation type support, some skills building support. So we want to make sure, as we talk about habilitation, and many of you who, are key to the class lingo know what that is. But if you're really thinking about HDS, we're really talking about a supported home living benefit that somebody may realize. So I just want to make sure when we talk about interest lists, people with SSI coming off interest lists are being identified for a community first choice benefit. It would be the habilitation assistant supporting class, the supported home living assistance type benefit from HDS.
Okay, the Senate Bill 7, either initiate or require co-payments or any kind of premium participation by family members.
It used to. And one of the things that as we began to discuss whether or not we would actually have the ability to require co-pays for children that are receiving services in institutions, that is prohibited by federal law. So, there was not a way for us to be able to do that. And as we began to talk about whether or not you want to put something in statute that you can't do, that may give people a level of concern that doesn't really exist, that didn't seem to be a wise choice. Okay? And so the other piece of that is whether or not to provide a copay for people that are receiving home and community-based services, and it would be based on parental income. One of the things that we don't do when we conduct an eligibility screen for those home and community-based services or class for children, we don't collect parental income information. So we could not, under the current way that we construct, we could not implement that either. So it didn't seem wise to have two provisions in the bill that you couldn't really implement, that also caused a lot of angst and concern amongst parents too. And so those were removed from the bill.
Thank you. And how will Senate Bill 7 ensure ongoing appropriate stakeholder input?
I don't think I've seen as many consumer advisory committees in one bill as in Senate Bill 7. I know, when we talk about putting Senate Bill 7 together, and the work that we've done, it's been some of the most productive I think I've ever worked on a piece of legislation. But then as I thought about it, I said, well, I'm going to be really glad when Senate Bill 7 passes, and I really hope it does. But then again, I started thinking, well, that's when the work really starts after that. And that's when it's going to be even more important for us to get more and more consumer input as we begin to implement the provisions of Senate Bill 7. Because a lot of you, and I know I've met a lot of parents, I've met a lot of consumers of services over the last 20 years. One of the worst things we could do is to have this opportunity to change this system in a beneficial way, in a way that means a lot, not to just people receiving services now, but to the people that will be receiving services in the future. Not to do this in a way that benefits the consumer. So when this bill passes, and I hope it does, and we begin that consumer input, there's a lot of advisory committees, and I encourage everybody that's in this room to continue to be involved in this as our system evolves. There's more consumer input opportunities, I hope, in this bill than any bill we've ever worked on. So.
Thank you. Now that concludes the prior submitted questions. I have a stack here that have come in from tonight's crowd here. and we're going to go through them. I noticed it's 7:20. With y'all's agreement, I would like to reserve the last 20 minutes from live comment or questions from the crowd here. So that leaves us 20 minutes to go through these questions. I would ask that you answer them concisely but completely. Okay? And I'm taking them in the order I got them. First one, how can people in ICFs be assured their services will not change when ICFs were left out of the changes allowing people currently in services to choose whether or not to go under an MCO? By the way, I'm just reading these.
An ICF service is very much like, it's institutional service, very much like nursing facility services. And an ICF is an entitlement service. Once the state opts to be in the ICF program, that service is an entitlement service. So unless the ICF that you or your loved one resides in, unless that ICF makes the decision to close on their own, which we've had 10 large ICFs in this state close in the last number of years. But the small ICFs, by and large, have not changed in number. But because ICF remains an entitlement, those ICF services will still be there. Hence the reason that you didn't really need to address it in the grandfathering provisions in the bill.
Okay, thank you. Again, we're going to go through, we've got a stack of these and still, yeah, that's good.
Was that
good.
concise?
It was concise enough, Commissioner. Okay, I think this question might be best answered by one of our legislative professionals. Why are state-supported living centers not included in the bill?
This bill was about reforming the long-term care, community care system and building up a system that individuals would have more services that they're currently waiting for right now.
Okay, next question.
Very concise, Jim. Thank you.
How can providers be assured that prompt payments will be received from MCOs when they currently have up to 30 days to make those payments? I'm going to ask Paul to answer that question.
The contract between the state and the MCOs does indeed require them to process and pay all clean claims within 30 days. They do average 10 to 15 days for those payments today. There are certain legislative initiatives out there today that would require them to process and pay claims in 15 days. But today I can assure you that the majority of our plans are in fact meeting or exceeding the current standards, and the average is certainly much less than 30.
Okay, next question. Who sponsored the amendment to add local authorities as service coordinators and why?
Senator Nelson added the amendment on the floor as a part of that much larger amendment, and the main reason was to ensure that individuals would have an independent entity to help guide them through the system the current way that they have that entity to help them now.
Okay, why are ICF group homes not included in the protections or choices promised HCS?
I don't understand the question. They are, right now, if you're an HCF, you have an opportunity to choose a residential setting. Now, ICF, not to confuse that as a group home, is an entitlement in this state. And so you're not obligated to be an HCF to be enrolled or live in an intermediate care facility for persons with intellectual disabilities. So there is no exclusion. You can access ICF IED support. And if you're an HCS, you can access residential support.
This is an interesting question here. What is being done to correct the situation where MCOs are using a medical test instead of a social test so that those with ID don't qualify as disabled, i.e. Down syndrome? I believe this refers to the current STAR Plus system.
Okay, and that's an excellent question, because I think this is where I think a lot of misconceptions come in. If you think of the current STAR Plus as it exists now, I can understand how you would, why and how you would ask that question. The current Star Plus as it exists now is not going to be the Star Plus that persons with intellectual and developmental disabilities will access those attendant rehabilitation services. The assessment for those individuals will be, can y'all hear me okay? I've got, okay. Those assessments for individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities will be different than a medical assessment. So you have to extract and separate Star Plus as it exists now, because yes, indeed it is an acute care model that provides community care services to persons that are physically disabled or have a need for 24-hour nursing care through the nursing facility waiver. The program begins to fundamentally change in September 1st of 14 for persons with intellectual and developmental disabilities. Did that answer that okay for whoever asked it? Okay.
Hello. Okay, next question. Okay, this is where will people with cognitive disabilities that are not developmental disabilities, which meant they occurred perhaps when at 25 instead of 18, where will these people access attendant rehabilitation?
Okay. So obviously within the class program there are some specific requirements related to eligibility. And so in the determination specifically around CFC, Community First Choice, and we're talking about the Rehabilitation Assistance Support Benefit, those individuals would have to meet institutional level of care qualifications. And so if there are individuals who would not meet those standards for those benefits, they may realize those benefits if they qualify based on needing assistance with activities of daily living. They may qualify for personal assistance services benefit in Star Plus. But they also may qualify for benefits through some of the other programs that are operated either by DADS or even through DARS. And so, you know, there are a variety of options. Star Plus is not the only option. Community First Choice Services is not the only option. And so, I mean, I would say best an individual should be assessed if they do need assistance with activities of daily living because of some physical disability or cognitive disability around their ability or inability to perform a function. They would want to be assessed there. But it is possible, and it is likely, that if their disability occurred after the age of 22, that they may not qualify for the CFC benefit. But we would certainly want to work with them as we would today to help them identify a program that can meet those needs.
Okay, this one might be quick. When does the pilot start?
I believe it's no later than 2016, but we'll verify.
Yeah, well, it did change during the process, and I believe Sharon is correct.
Okay. I believe the question is, will employment supports and ramped calves continue?
It's in class.
It is? Okay, so I read that right. Will employment supports and ramped calves continue? I guess these are for transportation? Okay.
So, I mean, I would speak to extremely specificity on this, but I think it's worth saying no benefits that exist right now will be cut. So no matter what, whatever it is on a very specific level, no services that exist in a current waiver is being taken out. Really all we're doing is trying to figure out how many benefits can you add into Star Plus as we move along in the system. And then after these benefits are added, consumers will have that choice to move in or stay in that program that they're in right now. So nothing changes with any existing waiver program that exists right now.
Okay, this next question was previously asked, so it's repetitive. Here's another one. Is there a budget for training providers for the unique needs of the population, i.e. the Prader-Willi syndrome children and adults going into ICF home residential settings?
we have budgets in the agency right now for training, and we have some discretion over what topics and what themes are included. So what I would need to do, there isn't anything I'm aware of that is dedicated and named as a training program for Prader-Willi specifically. But I think what we would want to do is look at the, there is a Prader-Willi provision in the bill, so let me let Sharon talk about that. Perhaps there's something that I'm overlooking.
Well, like Commissioner Weisenbaum mentioned, there is a provision in the bill that requires dads to conduct a study on Prader-Willi syndrome. And specifically what we had heard from the Prader-Willi community was that specifically with residential needs, there are some concerns around that and issues around available housing supports for individuals with Prader-Willi. So the study would essentially have dads study that issue further.
Can I say something really quick? You know, we're answering a lot of questions. I'm going to go back to something Commissioner Traylor said earlier. We are very open to any ideas or suggestions or improvements to the bill. So, for example, in this situation, if that is something that could be added to the study to look at, whether we need more specialized training, that is a perfect example. So we are very, you know, that's one of the reasons why we're coming here. Yes, we want to make sure we're educating everyone and answering everyone's questions, but we're also very eager to make sure we're making this a really great bill.
And I just wanted to confirm that the date for the pilot program is September 2016.
And I just wanted to add on as it related to Prader-Willi is that, you know, we talked about the provisions and around the significant traditional provider requirements. And so if those services are included in a managed care organization's program, then those providers that have been delivering those services and supports would be provided an opportunity, would be obligated by the MCO to contract with those entities. And so those providers that have that expertise, aside from training additional providers, would be included as part of that provider network, that families who benefited from those providers before would have an opportunity to continue to receive services through them.
Okay, now if I want to do justice to all who submitted written questions, these are going to be 1-minute answers, okay? The remainder, so we can have some time left for, you know, spontaneous free-for-all, yeah. So this question, why are co-pays taken out for some on waivers and not on other services? It's only fair to pay co-pays as some others who would, and of course there are some services that are co-pays. So 1-minute answer, please.
I think, you know, one of the areas where we require co-pays is SIMPAS. John, Commissioner Weisenbaum and I have been kind of looking at maybe possible ways to restructure the co-pays in SIMPAS. The other issue is, as I described earlier, implementing co-pays for the children's populations were not an implementable provision. So they were, that provision was removed from the bill.
We thought that was based on institutions versus community, though.
Yes, and also in the community, we do not collect income information on parents.
Right, but it could happen, but it would require that the system would have to be changed.
Yeah, the system would have to be changed, and if we determine the staffing levels that we would have to do to begin to do an eligibility screen for parents, that would have been an extraordinarily expensive proposition for the state to do.
I understand it, Commissioner, but I think the people need to understand that when that last discussion occurred at DAD, part of it was based on the institutional bias. Well, you have the program, which is SIM plans, Client Managed Personal Attendant Services. My family, I pay a copay of $70 a month.
Hey,
Our
Kathy,
income is not high.
I want you to be able to say this in a microphone, so can I come back and have you be the first person to speak in the free-for-all section?
That would be fine.
Okay, so the people online can hear you as well.
That's where it's based, where it's coming from, everyone, you need to be aware of that. Because that's inequity there. And you're talking about, you want it to be equitable across the whole system, well, that's where it's not.
Yeah, and also want to keep in mind that SIMPAS is a non-Medicaid program.
I understand that, but nonetheless, it's a home and community-based service program. It's a community program.
Okay, Kathy, I will come back to you during the free-for-all. No, I will. So the people online can hear your statement. Okay, how will the CDS program be impacted, if at all, in STAR Plus?
The CDS program is alive and well in Star Plus and shall continue to be so.
Yeah, and I also want to point out that consumer-directed services are utilized at a much higher level in Star Plus than they are in the other programs that are similar and operated outside of Star Plus.
Will there be a budget cap or reduction on those grandfathered in their current waivers? Will there be a budget cap or reduction on those grandfathered in their current waivers?
No.
No, okay, good.
Other
If someone-
than whatever budget cap exists anyway.
Yeah, other than
Waivers have a budget cap.
right.
Yeah.
Well, everybody, the budget cap that exists now will still be there, but there'll be no additional budget cap.
Okay, good. If someone loses their SSI eligibility, will that impact the Star Plus habilitation and respite care?
Well, let's keep in mind that respite is not considered as part of the benefit we talked about, although most of the services we've described do often provide respite for somebody who would be providing them if these services weren't delivered. It is built on individuals who are at SSI levels, so if an individual should no longer remain at SSI levels, there would be an impact to their ability to receive these services within the system. And even in the Star Plus environment where individuals have SSI that make them eligible to qualify for benefits, it does happen when they lose their SSI limits, then they have to go into traditional Medicaid. As it relates to CFC benefits, yes, if an individual is no longer SSI eligible, it would implement their ability to access those services would be impacted.
Okay, if a person with the deaf-blind multiple disability waiver goes into managed care and it doesn't work out, the bill doesn't allow the person to go back to the outside waiver, right?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Should one switch from Medicaid and be on the class program to the Star Plus program? If so, when? And this is speaking specifically to a child with Prader-Willi syndrome who is age 11. Okay, that means somebody is currently in the class program, Prader-Willi syndrome. Should they switch to the Star Plus program, and if so, when?
Well, I think as we talked about today, certainly until those benefits were carved in to Star Plus, that would not be a decision that the family would be making. Right now, if an individual is eligible for Star Plus, they can make a decision to enter Star Plus. But if they are interested in a benefit package that exists in class, today those services don't exist in Star Plus. And so what we've been talking about all evening is the potential ability for that full service array to be included and what would be contemplated in the future. But today, if you're relying on a benefit package in class, and those services don't exist in Star Plus, I would imagine you would stay in class.
And if you're in class in 2020, and you want to stay in that particular service in class, you're able to do so.
Okay, bear with me, this is a long question. What sort of support will be offered to willing providers to care for persons with Prader-Willi syndrome who currently are not receiving specialized care, such as crisis intervention, staff training, respite care, etc., to this unique life-threatening disability? HCS, ICF are not meeting the needs of persons with Prader-Willi.
Those are just notes.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Okay. Sorry.
So the question is, what sort of support will be offered to willing providers to care for persons with Prader-Willi syndrome who are not currently receiving services?
The STP provision that we talked about, significant traditional providers, is how we guarantee that the people that are out there willing and serving and keeping our people healthy, happy at home today will continue to be able to do that by mandatorily being offered contracts with the MCOs. Does that answer your question? No?
Oh, okay, so
if we have a provider, that is willing to open their doors to this very unique and difficult disability, what sort of supports are you going to be able to give the provider? I mean, because most of them are run. What kind of supports will you be able to give a provider that will enable, want them to help persons with
Prader-Willi syndrome, not necessarily incentives, but like specialized training for staff. You cannot just bring anyone in and hire them to be your staff member for a person with Prader-Willi syndrome. So what kind of supports, and I guess this would be in the stakeholder There's a specific study regarding Prader-Willi syndrome to help improve the system of provider networks, mainly in regards to housing. But I was saying before, if you would like to share with us some additional items to add into that specific study that they can consider. Right now, nothing in the system is going to specifically change. So we would not be cutting any services, you would not see any provider changes. If you're really talking about trying to make the system a better system, that is what the study is really looking at. And if there's some additional provisions you would like to be studied as a part of that, we can add that into the bill.
I was just going to add to what Jamie said. There seems to be a lot of questions around this particular issue, and I think if you all would come and meet with us specifically after this meeting or in our offices, I think we'd love to get your input.
I'm glad you said that. I would remind everybody that these folks are willing to take much further input way beyond tonight, okay? Okay, let's make these real quick. If you currently receive attendant or rehabilitation services under a class or HCS waiver, after the community first choice option is implemented, will these services be provided in Star Plus or the waiver or both? Quick answer.
They would be available, you would still receive them in your waiver that you're currently in, or if you're not receiving services and under SSI, you would receive them in Star Plus.
Okay, we're going to make this like the quick buzz-in answer, the quickest person buzzing will get to answer these questions. You refer to SSI eligibility to receive benefits. Are you saying that if an individual works and makes more than $75 per month, that individual would lose benefits? Is that the current Texas Home Living policy? Quick answer.
The current policy for Texas Home Living is that it is based on SSI limit, or 100% of SSI. It's the only waiver that's not up to 300%. So if you were employed and your income made you ineligible for SSI, you could potentially lose those benefits.
But if you're in CLAPS or HCS or any of the other waivers, that does not change.
Okay, quick, will the HCS provider still own the HCS home, and if not, who will?
If that would not change within the MCO network, if HCS residential services are carved into Star Plus, then the MCO would contract for the provision of those services. So there would not be the selling of a home or anything to support the Star Plus system.
Okay, by the way, folks have emailed in questions, these are being addressed. Okay, what will the role and relationship of current service providers be to a new managed care organization who will contract with the providers? How can hiring an MCO managed care organization be cost effective? It seems it will add a huge new layer of cost. Will DADS evolve over time to dissolve into a managed care organization?
I put that question in there.
Quick answer, please.
No.
No, the question, real quick.
The question is a legitimate one. It seems like we're adding a new layer into the system with managed care. How can that be cost effective?
So if you keep in mind the current system today, individuals receive their acute care in one part of the system, and they receive their long-term services and supports in another part. In that system today, they have an entity that's coordinating services, and that service is being paid for. If you contemplate managed care, you're talking about one entity coordinating both the acute care and the long-term services and supports piece. And there are, it's not about adding another layer. It's really talking about having a sole entity that's going to coordinate those services across that whole system, whether they be acute or long-term services and supports. So it isn't, I don't want everyone to leave here thinking we're adding yet another layer. We're really talking about a point that can coordinate and really focus on the outcomes of those members. And we have a lot of experience with this in the state with a number of populations, and it would reveal that the outcomes have improved for those members, and it did not increase the cost to those services.
Okay, there's a few more email questions. We will get those answered and emailed back to you. So this is the free-for-all section. Anybody raise their hand? Okay.
Okay, first sorry, I have to adjust the sound here. So the first question of the day was about if all individuals in a Medicaid waiver would be affected. If all individuals receiving Medicaid would be affected by SB 7? And you answered yes. But are individuals in the SSLCs affected by SB 7?
And the question is, were people in SSLCs? One of the things that we hope is we improve, community coordination and access to the community. And if a person who resides in an SSLC wishes to transition into the community, that's their choice, or their guardian's choice, or the legally authorized representative's choice. We hope that we have a more easily accessible community system for regardless whether a person resides in a large ICF or an SSLC or anywhere else. But SSLC services are not in the bill.
So when you said yes, you weren't correct?
No, absolutely was correct. It said if a person resides in an SSLC and the person wants to access services in the community, that the bill itself would the goal of the bill is to make those community services more accessible. So if a person lives in an SSLC, they might have a quicker, better access to community services.
So does the SB 7 affect everyone who receives Medicaid as it stands right now? Not potentially, but does it affect everyone who receives Medicaid immediately?
I think I answered your question. I'm sorry.
Acute services.
Will they receive acute care services? No, the acute care services that are received by persons in an SSLC, most of the acute care services are provided in the SSLC.
So maybe I'm just not understanding it. So it does or does not affect people in SSLCs, SB 7?
It would if they ended up being sent into a hospital, a private hospital, not one of the state's supported living centers, but if they entered a hospital, there are quality of care provisions on how we pay hospitals to ensure that any recipient of Medicaid is getting better care in a hospital setting. So in that sense, yes, there are provisions in the bill that impact every single person that is in the Medicaid program.
So if they end up in a different setting, then they're going to be affected by it, but in the setting that they're in, they're not going to be affected by it. Am I understanding?
Yeah, and please hear me on this. If a person that resides in an SSLC seeks services in the community, they want to move from an SSLC to the community, the bill itself, through the assessment process that John talked about, and through the no wrong door piece, persons that live in an SSLC, if they want to move out, or their guardian or the legally authorized representative wants them to move out, the community should be more accessible to them because of Senate Bill 7.
So a more accurate answer might be potentially.
Well,
Yes or yes,
and I think a very good example is for some individuals that may want to move out of an SSLC that couldn't, there might have been, say, an additional behavioral health component. This bill actually starts to build a much better behavioral health system for individuals with IDD. That's a very specific example of how we're trying to build a broader availability of community care for all individuals so that anyone who wants that choice can make that choice to move out. And there will be providers there available for them.
Thank you.
Okay, I have a question. I'm on SDI. Would that hurt me if I do think about going to Star Plus?
Yeah, so she has supplemental security disability income. So we would, if you were contemplating Star Plus today, I want to make sure you hear my answer. But so if you were contemplating Star Plus today, then you would. Well, I just think it'd be better if we visited offline for me to get into what your income is and all the limits. Can you just come see me at the end of our meeting here?
Yep.
Okay.
I have a question about how we're going to be able to find doctors when this change occurs. It's already very difficult to find doctors that accept traditional Medicaid, and many doctors don't contract with MCO, so many people with disabilities who've seen the same doctor for years are going to have to change doctors, which I think is wrong. I work for a provider here in Austin. We already drive to Elgin, we drive to San Marcos, San Antonio for Medicaid doctors, and it's a big problem. So, I mean, I'm picturing how this is going to be a problem.
And I want to add to that. I'm a mom, and my daughter's there.
And she just had a problem a week ago where they thought it was maybe a spider bite, and it was infected, and the earliest appointment they could get was 4 days later. So they took her she called and said, should we take her to the emergency room? I said, yes. Well, it turned out to be a staph infection, and I was very, very happy that they got her to the emergency room, but it was too bad that a doctor was so hard to get into that we had to do that.
The MCOs are required to build a network of physicians and all kinds of providers to meet certain access standards. One of the things that we do is provide a directory so people can identify and choose the providers that are in each HMO's network. One of the other items is that we do have contract standards for how quickly we expect people to be able to get in and be seen by a physician. So there are extra benefits and contract requirements that we have that the regular fee-for-service Medicaid program does not.
And I want to add something. One, access to a primary care doc is an issue with or without this bill in the Medicaid program. But there are a number of initiatives that are going on. One, primary care docs are going to get paid to the level of Medicare. Actually, they just started in January. So now you're going to have primary care docs paid almost double what they're getting paid right now in the Medicaid program, which overall should hopefully incentivize more of them to take Medicaid patients. Two, we're working on another graduate medical education programs to try to get doctors out there into areas that have health profession shortage areas that are willing to take Medicaid clients. Additionally, Commissioner Janik back there has a number of proposals trying to work with our health science centers to train and get access to physicians for our Medicaid population to bring them in. But I do want to echo what Paula said, and that is that in the current fee-for-service system, there may be providers out there, but there's not a guaranteed network of them. You are on your own to find them. When it comes to managed care, there are very strong contract provisions that are stronger than it exists in the private commercial market that require them to have a network of providers. Additionally, they're required by outcome measures to make sure that they are reducing preventable emergency room visits. So if they're not getting the patients into the doctor, they're going to have high emergency room visits that could have prevented, and they're going to be held accountable for that financially. So there are a number of strong outcome measures and provisions in place that already exist, and they're being added by SB 7 to help improve that.
Yeah, one thing I want to point out is if you go back a number of years to, I think, 2005, when children in foster care, children in state conservatorship, had serious access issues to physician services, psychological services, psychiatric services. One thing that the state determined to do, because we saw that we could build those networks better and have network requirements, the state did move to what we call it Star Health, a managed care product for persons, for children that are in foster care. And the reason we did that is because that fee-for-service system that you're having to navigate on a daily basis, where you have to go out and find that doctor, was very difficult for those foster parents to be able to navigate. That's why we moved to that Star Health model. And we found that it's been much easier for those parents to find a doctor, keep a psychologist. As you know, psychiatrists are very difficult to find right now, not just in Texas, but across the nation. And that Star Health model provided those persons an access and a point where they always are assured of having a primary care provider, because the state requires in that contract that every individual, including your daughter, has a primary care provider to go to on a regular basis. So, I understand your concern about that, but it's our job as the state to make sure that those managed care organizations, you have a primary care provider every day available to you. Not just that you have to shop around and call to get somebody in the current fee-for-service market in which you exist now.
Okay, I have a concern about the SSI 100% eligibility to receive the Texas Home Living. My number one concern is in the new Star Plus that's being developed. Is that requirement for benefits going to stand, or will it reflect the HCS and class eligibility?
That program right now, so if you're talking about moving the program as it exists right now into Star Plus and maintaining it as it exists right now, you're talking about maintaining that SSI level. Now, could different decisions be made by 2017 when they make that decision through the legislative process or stakeholder process? That's always a possibility as we start planning this system out. In the CBA program, once you're in, even if you're over SSI, you get to stay in the program right now, right?
You do. The only difference in Star Plus as it relates to the waiver, the CBA-like services, that if you're not SSI, you wouldn't enter immediately, but you would be on an interest list for what we refer to as medical assistance only. But once you're in, if your status should change from SSI to above SSI limit, you remain in the waiver. But Texas Home Living today is the only waiver that is the 1915C waiver that is really built on 100% and does take into consideration, parental resources and assets as it relates to eligibility.
I just had one question, and it's really, are they going to be opening up new slots for HCS in the near future?
The budget does appropriate additional home and community services slots.
Before 2016?
Oh, yeah, I mean, it's a legislative decision every session, so the bill itself does not change that. The bill is really building up a second system to go along with the process that exists right now. So it doesn't really change that. You would still have a legislative decision made every session to fund additional
I have heard that if you're in an HCS home and you're unhappy, you can take your money with you to a different one, but that ICFs are the hardest to retreat from because they actually own your budget and you don't. Is anything about that changing with this bill?
The ICF benefit that you're speaking to is an entitlement in this state. And as it's structured today, individuals can access ICF. They are not guaranteed to be able to enter the ICF they want, but if there is an ICF, if they're interested, they can get one. The difference between an ICF benefit, like a nursing home, the entitlement, and a waiver, is that in a waiver program, the individual owns a slot. So if you're not happy with the service array through a provider, you can change. If you want to be in foster care in HCF and tomorrow you decide you want to go into a group home, you can do that. And if you want to leave that provider altogether and go to another part of the state, you can do that. And you do what we refer to as you own that waiver benefit. But ICF, nursing facilities, that entitlement is really structured the same way. You can access an entitlement, but you don't really own that entitlement. So if you were interested in the 6-bed ICF, for example, and there wasn't an available bed, you would have to wait until that's available or go to where there is one.
And you can't move from one to another.
You can. You can move from one ICF to another. If, a lot of people are interested in small ICFs, and they're typically the ones that are pretty, full and remain full, and some of them maintain a waiting list for those. But absolutely, if you live in an ICF today and you're not happy with that ICF, you are not obligated to remain in that ICF. You could change to another ICF, albeit there's one that you want and they have a bed available. But you absolutely can change.
And if you're in a larger medium one, there is a money policy for some programs to help assist individuals move from that to a different type of community care program. And in the Appropriations Act, there are promoting independent spots to help individuals move into the community out of institutional settings.
So you could access HDS through that process. And then there's diversion slots if you were at risk of placement in a state supported living center.
As a provider, in addition to our concerns about being paid up to 30 days late after providing services, I'm also hearing that the MCOs can set their own rates, which is very concerning, and thinking that they could pay us a lower rate, and I'm not sure how we would survive if they're deciding the rates. I'm curious as to why rates aren't going to be set for providers.
So unlike the traditional system that's based on the Medicaid fee schedule, managed care organizations establish their own provider networks, and they do have the ability to negotiate those rates that they pay to providers. So, it varies. Many providers for like attendance services may pay the fee schedule. Some acute care settings, they're obligated to pay above the fee schedule to be able to contract with those entities. But they do have the ability to pay less than the Medicaid fee schedule. And so that is a possibility. that an MCO, sometimes it happens based on the sheer number of providers within a network. So let's say they have a robust provider network already, and new providers want to enter. There may be an arrangement that says, we really have all the providers we need. If you come into our network, we're only going to entertain a contract with you at 90% of what we would pay. But they do have the ability to negotiate that. As a provider, you have the ability to either agree to those contract terms or not. But within that system, they are responsible for negotiating those agreements.
And let me point out that under federal law, you have to be offered the individual that resides, so you have group homes, I know. The individual that resides in that group home, for example, doesn't necessarily, they can switch managed care organizations if the one that's trying to negotiate a rate down on you can just move to the other managed care organization, the individual can. And so you have leverage. The people that live in your home certainly has leverage in that regard. You're not tied to that particular or held hostage by that one particular HMO.
Hi, my question regards the HIP program. Currently, my daughter is privately insured as well as in the Star Plus program under the DVMD waiver. And if I want to keep her with a physician that is not in one of the Star Plus programs, I can opt to be more in control of her care and go to a physician and just pay her insurance copay. But I'm concerned if the HIP dynamic is going to remain in place, which still allows me to have that to keep our health insurance and to afford it. And then also, does that make sense? My question makes sense.
It makes
I'm concerned if the HIP benefit's going to go away.
Sure, it makes perfect sense. And if you look at the enrollment in the HIP program, there's a lot of children with disabilities that are enrolled in the HIP program. And that's something that Senator Nelson asked me about, and her staff asked me about frequently. How are you doing in enrollment in the HIP program? There's still very strong support for the HIP program, and the HIP program does not go away in any way with the provisions of Senate Bill 7. In fact, like I said, I get encouraged to enroll, make sure people know the availability of HIP across the state.
My question will be a good question. So I just got an email from one of our members that you're a microboard. You all familiar with the microboards, correct? And there she is wanting to know, how will Senate Bill 7 impact the microboard environments that we have, settings that we have?
Microboards have become a very essential piece of the patchwork that families that have children, particularly and adult children with disabilities, have put together. Those microboards have become very essential to a lot of families. And those microboards, I think, not only will stay, but hopefully they'll be strengthened by more people coming into the system and understanding that there's other supports, not just through the Medicaid program, but other supports that exist for families. So hopefully we can also not only encourage the development of microboards, but make those existing microboards even stronger through the bill.
I think we'll take two more questions. Over here.
If one would like to open an ICF home, does this state bill or does the state assist you financially or match you in some way, or can you put me in the right direction to research doing that?
The bill really doesn't affect or address resources for opening a new ICF. Right now, there really aren't any state subsidies or extra financial assistance that are provided for that. So we could certainly put you in touch with provider organizations that are trade groups for those organizations. They might be able to answer some of the questions on what their members do. But
so how do you get open? How do you start that process?
Yeah, I mean, there's a licensing and a certification part, and there's also not a large number of new ICF slots that come available for providers. So but there is a market among ICF provider capacity between where
Because in
that.
the Houston area, where I'm from, there's very few homes of any sort for children with Prader-Willi syndrome particularly, but I don't know, I mean, I can't speak to other disorders, but, you know, to be able to provide, we would be willing to open one. I mean, we can't buy the whole house and, you know, staff the whole house, but we would start. So if I knew where to start.
Well, I think that the whole issue of capacity for Prader-Willi services is one of the things that we're being asked to study as part of that. So I think that'd be one of the topics to look at.
So on behalf of everyone here, you know, these folks here are working very hard right now, and as are many of the people in this room. And for y'all to come out here on a weeknight and stay till 8 o'clock, which, by the way, none of that work on your desk is getting done right now. Well, are aware of that. So folks from left to right, Paula, Gary, Chris, Shannon, Jamie, Sharon, John, let's give them a round of applause.
Recognize that Commissioner Janik, who's trying to sneak out in the back, has been with us, I think, for the whole 2 hours, and we really appreciate his participation too. So thank you.
Commissioner, would you like to say a word with me? Would you like to say a word? Just a quick word? No? Okay. I'd like to say that also thanking you guys for coming. Hope you got all your questions answered. I have a feeling there's still some lingering questions. We have set up an email address, sp7feedback@gmail.com. Please feel free to email us questions. We will forward them to someone who can get them answered for you. Okay? So, sp7feedback@gmail.com. So please send those in. We'd be happy to help get you connected with the right answers. Also, I would be remiss if I didn't thank our campus administrator for Rosedale for supporting us in having this event, and Ryan for supporting us with soundtrack. So thank you all very much. We hope you found as helpful as possible.
All right.